Subject: Cain, the DNA of the common ancestor, and sons of God. Hello world and God's faithful. May His grace be upon you today and forevermore while fulfilling your purpose in life. If this is your first visit, I bid you welcome. But I recommend that you view the previous 9 promotional videos as the subjects are interconnected. However, if this is your follow-up visit and one of my few subscribers, welcome back and hope this video provides an answer to another lingering question of yours like most of us have regarding biblical stories. For this 10th video, I am going to summarize some claims discussed in book. These claims have to do with Cain and the biblical link between man and chimp, the identity of the sons of God in Genesis, and the link between Cain and the sudden surge of knowledge during biblical history of the world. We start with biblical facts. First, when Cain was born, Eve introduced her son into the record by stating that, "I have acquired a man from the Lord." There is no definitive conclusion from Torah and biblical scholars as to meaning of this statement. Second, after Cain murdered his brother Abel, he moved to the east of the Garden of Eden. Third, Cain moved out of the presence of the Lord. The inclusion of the Garden of Eden and direction where Cain moved to in story, made it a parable about Cain and brain development. Fourth, while living in the east of Eden, Cain built the first city on earth with his reptilian brain. As I said in last video, the first 10 generations of the Bible were only equipped with the reptilian brain. A brain unit that, according to our experts, was incapable of such advanced knowledge. Fifth, God then recorded Cain as having a son while outside of God's presence, but the mother was not identified on record. Sixth, after 5 generations of Cain's descendants, Adam's third son Seth was born. These 2 facts are important in determining how Cain ended up with a son and descendants when there was no other humans alive to have any with. Cain only had a son and no daughters based on record also. So no incest was involved here. It had been suggested by many that Adam and Eve's children had incest resulting in populating the world. This is however inconsistent with biblical record following Cain's family tree and the birth of Seth, who was the 3rd child of Adam and Eve. Seth was born after Cain had 5 generations of descendants according to God's record. Seventh, when the 3rd son Seth was born, Adam not only introduced him as a replacement for Abel whom Cain killed, but when Moses added him onto Adam's family tree in Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, Moses referred to Seth as a son begotten in his father's own image and likeness. Seth's introduction as the son created from Adam's image and likeness, separated him from Cain, who was introduced as a man acquired from the Lord. Eighth, in Genesis chapter 6, 2 separate groups on earth were identified, daughters of men and sons of God. I am claiming that the daughters of men were descendants of Seth, who was created from the image and likeness of his father Adam, whereas the sons of God were descendants of Cain, who was a man acquired from the Lord. Ninth, sons of God then took daughters of men as wives for themselves, whomever they wanted. This made God angry. As I said in prior video, the sexual aggression of the sons of God provided us with evidence of the nature of the brain these generations were equipped with at the first stage of human evolution. This brain was the reptilian unit, and one of its characteristics was sexual aggression, as the reptilian brain's main concern was to survive by passing genes forward according to the triune brain theory. So these are biblical facts from record and my short interpretations of them. But here are 2 scientific facts that has caused a lot of bitter debate between science and religion. Both facts were from English naturalist, the father of evolution, Charles Robert Darwin, and related to Cain's story and the DNA of our common ancestor with the chimpanzee. First, Darwin promoted the idea that all species share a common ancestor and that man and chimpanzee shared one. As it turns out, the latest studies showed that man and chimp does share 96% of DNA, so Darwin was correct. The second fact from Darwin was a claim that species evolved by natural selection. In layman terms, it means that animal species who are able to adjust and adapt to their environment survive, while others will not. For example, Our species that adapts to the environment during long-term food shortage such as in a drought may survive. One can adapt, for example, by changing diet and survive, while others who fail to do so will not. What Darwin proposed are also found in biblical record. I came to suspect that Darwin was the only person who understood the events surrounding Cain and the scientific parallel meaning of the flood of Noah. Let's deal first with the DNA link discovered between chimpanzee and man. The link, as explained by our experts, is that we had a common ancestor with chimpanzees from our past. This link, as I claim, is found in the biblical record. It came through Cain and the first 5 biblical generations of his descendants. I don't believe the activities surrounding Cain were reported without cause, and the discovery of the DNA link explains for me how Cain had 5 generations of descendants before Adam's third son Seth was born. Our teachers focus more on Cain as a murderer while ignoring these other facts such as the identity of Cain's spouse and his son Enoch, including his ability to build a city without any peers to learn from. As I explained in 9th video, the first 10 generations of mankind were all equipped with reptilian brains, just as animals of the fields were. Cain left the evidence of the brain he was equipped with on record with the murder of his brother, a typical behavior by the reptilian brain. A 5th generation of Cain's descendants named Lamech was also recorded with violent behavior like Cain, and with sexual traits of the reptilian brain, as he was the first to have 2 wives. Sexual aggression is a characteristic of the reptilian brain also. Insinuations and assumptions that the world was populated initially through incest by Adam and Eve's children is not supported by the biblical record. We ignored that Cain had 5 generations of descendants before Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, was born. So where did Cain and his son got their wives from? Science revealed the answer with the 96% DNA link to chimpanzees. Science filled the gap from the biblical record and provided us with another example of the scientific nature of the Bible. We may feel disgusted with the idea, but it was normal to Cain considering that he was equipped with similar reptilian brain unit as chimpanzees. And one of the accepted characteristic or trait of the reptilian brain is sexual aggression. Cain's behavior was consistent with biblical record, as well as the only purpose assigned to Adam was to be fruitful and multiply, which is generally accepted as to mean to procreate. So Cain fulfilled his purpose with whomever was available to him, and the DNA identified the whomever it was, since there were no human females around at the time yet. Another mystery of Cain's story was why God made it known that Cain moved out of his presence. What was the meaning of this, and why was it so important to preserve it on record? Considering that God is everywhere in the universe, including Cain's brain, as God was riding in the atom's neutron, Cain could not move out of God's presence unless it was a parable. I came to conclude that it was meant to project the idea that the first son was free to make a personal choice as a result of brain development. God had no influence in decision, and being out of God's presence projected Cain's independence to decide on his own. I did not mention this in book, however, as it came to me after. Cain then built the first city on earth. As Cain was only equipped with the reptilian brain, God's record contradicted science, as the reptilian brain was incapable of such feat. But this was where I came to understand the meaning of Cain's introduction into record as a man acquired from the Lord. Cain was special. We only saw him as a murderer, but overlooked the biblical fact that he built the first city on earth, and this took knowledge. This was unusual, as such human accomplishments had been attributed by our experts to the modern brain, or the smart brain, which is the neocortex. Cain was therefore a contradiction to science. However, as I discuss in book, Cain's introduction as a man acquired from the Lord as compared to Seth, who was a son created from his father's image, was important in understanding who Cain was as God presented him as. His ability to build the first city on earth with a reptilian brain, for example, supported his identity as a man acquired from the Lord. Based on this introduction in comparison to Seth's, who was introduced as a man created in his father's image and likeness, Cain was most likely a half-god half-man. Cain was a hybrid. The other two biblical facts discussed further in book that led me to determine Cain's nature were the Garden of Eden and the direction in comparison to the garden that Cain moved to. I am leaving the identity of the garden and direction where he settled on, however, for you to discover in book. Once you do, it will add more evidence in support of my claim of Cain's nature as a hybrid. His ability to build a city, and the skills his descendants acquired as biblically recorded while equipped with reptilian brains in Genesis chapter 4, such as being musicians and iron workers, were meant to project a surge of knowledge that was abnormal for a family equipped only with similar brains to beasts of the fields and chimpanzees. One of the lingering questions for scientists today has to do with the sudden surge of knowledge that came in at about 10,000 years ago or so, according to some experts. According to evolution theory, after a million years or two, modern humans emerged at about 200,000 years ago. But a surge in knowledge came about with unprecedented speed only at about between 10 to 15,000 years ago, depending on whom you asked from scientific fields. The search is ongoing as to how it came about, and there are of course plenty of speculations. However, the Bible though has an answer, and that answer was Cain, who was a man acquired from the Lord. Where he moved to, as discussed in book, added more biblical evidence in support of Cain's contribution to the surge in knowledge for the modern man. In consideration of scientific estimation, it appears that the surge of knowledge came around the biblical time frame that Cain's family began with an unknown mother. Cain's ability to build a city with a reptilian brain was meant to project this injection of knowledge into the human brain that separated man from beasts even further. The DNA link was also established during this same time, and it is now a biblical marker and a piece of scientific evidence. If we can trace back in time the exact period when Cain created the DNA link with the chimp, then I am confident that we will find the exact moment when knowledge began its surge. The surge of knowledge was not a result, however, of mating with a chimp, but because Cain was a special ambassador, as he was a man acquired from the Lord. If I am reading the scientific literature properly, it appears that the surge was sudden and coincidentally, to be around the time period of the early stages of biblical creation of heaven and earth. It is one of those convenient coincidences that require further attention by our intellectuals. As if to affirm Cain's special nature, God then separated mankind into two groups in Genesis chapter 6 verse 1. God identified one group as sons of God, whereas the other group as daughters of men. The only clue God left as to identity of sons of God was from Cain's introduction as a man acquired from the Lord. It is therefore my claim that the sons of God were descendants of Cain. Once I found the atom hidden in biblical text, then the idea that stories of the Torah were all in parables took shape. This was the case with Cain as well. The sons of God was a parable left to support another parable, the parable about the meaning of Cain as a man acquired from the Lord. The daughters of men, as I claim, were from the line of Seth, a son created in the image and likeness of his father Adam, the first man. This was what God meant by referring to this group of women as daughters of men, thereby linking them to Seth. God then specifically recorded the physical appearance of daughters of men to be beautiful. This observation promoted the idea that the female descendants of the sons of God must have not been as beautiful in comparison to daughters of men. It makes sense if the matriarchs of sons and daughters of God were from a line of chimpanzees. The sons of God chose daughters of men based on physical appearances. God used the physical appearances of daughters of man in comparison to females from Cain's line, to preserve the evidence of the identity of Cain's wife. We can easily understand today the meaning of separating the two groups, that of descendants of women from family tree of chimps, and females from the line of man. The social interaction between the two groups produced men that God referred to as mighty men of old, men of renown. As discussed in book, the record indicates that there was intermarriages between Cain's descendants and Seth's. The evidence was not only preserved with how sons of God took daughters of men as wives, but names of Cain and his descendants were also found in Seth's lineage as well. Cain had Enoch and Lamech, whereas Seth had Canaan, Enoch and Lamech. This social interaction was confirmed by the record of sons of God taking daughters of men as wives whomever they wanted. Considering how genetics are passed forward according to science, this meant that the DNA from Cain and his descendants was preserved through the interaction with daughters of men and was passed to Noah, who then passed it forward to us today. The DNA of a man acquired from the Lord survived and explains for me the sudden surge in knowledge that mystifies our scientists today. In plain language, Cain was not all human, but a half-man half-god. He was a man acquired from the Lord after all, which made it possible for him to build a modern city with a reptilian brain, while his descendants developed advanced skills such as playing musical instruments and working with metals. I strongly suspect that Darwin saw the missing link in Adam's family tree. There was a long gap between the murder of Abel and the birth of Seth. But in between the time period, Cain had children. Here was the second contribution by Darwin that paralleled God involving the Bible's reptilian generations. It came through the flood of Noah and what I claim was the biblical version of Darwin's survival of the fittest. God's evolution came through the flood. It appeared that God got upset with the sexual aggression by sons of God who took daughters of men as wives, whomever they chose. God also cited the wickedness of men, and that earth was filled with violence. A flood was ordered, but one man however had found favor with God. His name was Noah, and according to biblical record, he found favor with God because he had developed three characteristics. Noah was a just man, he was perfect in his generations, and he walked with God. With the three characteristics, God attached the magnificence of the three to Noah also in preparation to develop the next brain unit, which was the limbic or the emotional brain. Noah's characteristics provided meaning as to what Darwin classified as survival traits under evolution theory. The three traits recognized by God were what saved his life. While mankind of these first 10 generations were dealing with characteristics of the reptilian brain, Noah adapted, and the three characteristics were the traits he used to adapt with. Noah was the natural selection to survive because of these three survival traits he used in his daily life. As habits and behaviors are passed genetically as discussed in previous video, this meant that God chose these three characteristics as tools to develop the next brain unit with. The flood was the first known case of evolution recorded in human history. Darwin came on and explained it in scientific terms. Only the fittest will survive and evolve to the future was how he put it. But to survive, one must adapt with certain traits, and Noah was preserved as the first case of the fittest of mankind. God made it known that Noah was the fittest as he was a just man, perfect in his generations, and he walked with God. God then drowned the whole world, and the fittest was sent forth with 3 sons. As they did, they also left the old world with Cain's genetics of a man acquired from the Lord. The surge of knowledge continues today, and it began with what I claim was an injection of advanced knowledge that God equipped Cain with. According to evolution, man had been on Earth for 1 million years or so. Yet, since Israel emerged from the desert with the first atom bomb in the universe at only about 4,000 years ago, man had not only split the atom and recreated the Ark of the Covenant, but recently dropped a satellite on the sun. Except for the record in Genesis of a man acquired from the Lord who built a city with his reptilian brain, the roots of this surge of knowledge cannot be explained. Remember that I am claiming that once Adam and Eve were created, rest of biblical stories were about neurological development and tools needed for this purpose. The case of Cain as a man acquired from the Lord was another example of a tool that God injected into the development of the human brain that we inherited. As of now, though, the mystery of man's common ancestor with the chimpanzee is more obvious from record in Genesis, and I strongly suspect Darwin understood it. That common ancestor was Cain's wife. So there you have it. These are some of the subjects discussed in book. It is still tentatively scheduled for June now. I will update you as date gets closer through these videos. Title of book is The Magnificence of the Three. You can pre-order however with Amazon, iTunes, Barnes & Nobles, and with your Christian bookstores. If you find videos helpful in your own search, please be a priest and share it to your community so others may come to God as well. Subscribe as well so you can be updated on book progress and when new videos are uploaded. But thank you for your time, and if it is God's will, we shall meet again. May God be your guidance and supporter in your own journey as He had been in mine. Go in peace until next time. Take care of yourself and each other. Stay blessed.